Hello friends, and welcome to Marsh Studio. I'm William Seiji Marsh. Today I want to talk a little bit about triads. This is a topic that I've taught to many of my students over the years in both my private and university studios. I personally have found this course of study profoundly effective in understanding and navigating Western harmony, and I've had lots of positive feedback from my students regarding my methodology. This lesson will probably be most easily understandable for guitarists that have a basic background in music theory, particularly those that have a grasp on the terminology regarding intervals and are familiar with the construction of the major scale and its modes. If there's something in this video that doesn't make sense to you, please don't be shy about posting questions in the comment section below, or reach out to me for one-on-one coaching to get the most out of these videos. Without any further ado, let's dig into this material. A triad is a specific type of chord. It's a group of 3 harmonic notes stacked in thirds, and it's a fundamental component of Western harmony. Chances are you already know some triads. Most guitarists start out by learning their open position chords like C, G, E minor, etc., and we eventually move on to the E and A-shaped bar chords. Because the guitar is a very shape-oriented instrument, we often start by learning the minimum number of chord or scale patterns, which we can then easily transpose to different keys. Because of this, we can often get away with knowing a limited number of chord shapes or scale patterns. Before I spent time studying what I'm about to show you, I found myself relying on 2 or 3 different ways to play a particular chord, which gave me a baseline flexibility in what I was able to play, but ultimately it limited my range of expression on the instrument. If you are a guitarist that feels limited by your knowledge of the fretboard, stay tuned to this series because the information and methods contained here will expand your understanding of the instrument in a way that you may have never thought possible. There are many different ways to play any given chord on the guitar, and having access to as many voicings as possible unlocks a whole world of possibilities on the instrument. In a band, for example, you could have the option of playing chords in a different range of the instrument to better accompany the lead singer, or as a lead player you could arpeggiate these shapes while fluidly following the harmony. As a solo guitarist, more chord voicings in your vocabulary means more options in harmonizing melodies. Regardless of what you do with these, one thing is for sure. This course of study will greatly expand your knowledge of the fretboard, and the great thing about studying the triad inversions on the guitar is that triads truly are a universal component in Western music. Whether you're playing jazz, blues, pop, folk, rock, metal, whatever, you'll find that triads are a fundamental component of the music. Knowing and being able to access all of your inversions on the neck will be beneficial regardless of where the guitar takes you. There are 4 types of triads: major, minor, diminished, and augmented. I'm going to focus on the first 3 in this video series because they're the ones that occur naturally in the major scale. As I mentioned earlier, a triad is made up of 3 notes, stacked in thirds. Let's look at the first position G major chord. The lowest note is G, the root. On the 5th string is B, which is the 3rd of the chord, and on the 4th string is D, the 5th of the chord. These 3 notes are the essential components of the G major chord. If you look at the other notes in this voicing, you'll find another G on the 3rd string, another B on the 2nd string, and yet another G on the 1st string. To build a G major chord, all you need are these 3 notes, the G, B, and D. Knowing that in order to make any G chord, all you need is a G, a B, and a D, then one could build their own voicing on the guitar by simply finding places on the neck to grab at least one of each of these notes. And as we know, the guitar is a pattern-based instrument, so if you find a G chord shape anywhere on the neck, then you can easily transpose it to any key, effectively giving you access to the 12 major chords. The intention of this series is to show you where you can play all of your close position, major, minor, and diminished triads on the guitar. Furthermore, I'll give you a practice methodology so you can practice effectively to learn how to access all of your major, minor, and diminished triads and voice lead them smoothly and musically. In this first installment, we're going to focus on where to play the close position G major and A minor triads on adjacent 3-string groups on the guitar. A close position voicing simply means that the notes are as close together as possible. In other words, you couldn't fit another chord tone in between the 3 notes of the voicing. The reason I'll be limiting the scope of our study to these close position voicings is because there's a very limited number of close position voicings on the guitar. In close position, there are only 3 ways to stack a voicing: root position, first inversion, and second inversion. In root position, the root of the chord is the lowest voice in the chord. If we invert the root in the bass up 1 octave, then we have the 3rd of the chord in the bass. This is the first inversion. Moving the 3rd up an octave leaves the 5th in the bass, which is our second inversion. Inverting it once again will leave us with the root in the bass, giving us a root position voicing 1 octave higher than where we started. Don't worry if you didn't catch all that. It'll become a lot clearer in context. Open position voicings, which are voicings where the chord tones are displaced by octaves, sound beautiful on the guitar, but we won't be covering them in this video. However, these same exercises can be adapted to work for learning your open position voicings as well. If we're playing 3-note voicings on the guitar, we need exactly 3 strings to play them. Since we're focusing on close position chords, we'll use adjacent 3-string sets, of which there are 4 on the guitar. Strings 4, 5, and 6, strings 3, 4, and 5, strings 2, 3, and 4, and strings 1, 2, and 3. If there are 3 inversions on each set of strings and 4 total sets of strings, then we have a total of 12 unique shapes for any given chord on the guitar. Furthermore, once you know these 12 shapes, you can transpose them to any key. Let's begin by looking at the bottom 3 notes of our first position G chord. This is a root position G chord in close position. This is the lowest possible close position G triad on the guitar in standard tuning. We know this because if we were to invert this triad down by transposing the top note of D down 1 octave, it would be a whole step lower than the 6th-string E note, making it impossible to play without altering the tuning of the guitar. Let's find the next inversion of the G chord on this string set, strings 4, 5, and 6. This can be done by transposing the bass note up 1 octave, which is our root, G in this case. First, we transpose the G from the 6th string up 1 octave to the G on the 4th string at the 5th fret. This will be the new top note of the chord. Now we have to take the remaining notes and shift them down 1 string while retaining the same pitch. This is achieved by shifting down 1 string and adding 5 frets. The B on the 5th string will move from the 2nd fret to the 6th string at the 7th fret. And the D on the open 4th string will move to the 5th fret of the 5th string. This gives us the B in the bass, followed by the D and the G in the top voice. Because the third of the chord is at the lowest pitch in this voicing, it is the first inversion voicing. Using the same methods, we can find the third and final chord shape on strings 4, 5, and 6. We move the B in the bass up 1 octave to the 4th string at the 9th fret, and move the other 2 chord tones down 1 string and move them up 5 frets. Now we have the D, the 5th in the bass, followed by the root, G, and the B, the 3rd on the top. One thing I'd like to note is that in all of these voicings, the voices of the chord are stacked from low to high. Root, 3rd, 5th, root, 3rd, 5th, and so on. So if you can remember where the root of each chord is, you'll always know that the note below it is the 5th and the note below that is the 3rd, and so on. By learning how these notes relate to each other and engaging with the function of each note in the chord, you will accelerate your learning of the notes on the neck. I encourage you to take some time to map out these chords on your own, because by engaging with these concepts, you will learn them more thoroughly. But for the sake of forward momentum, I'll show you the other 9 voicings right now. On strings 3, 4, and 5, the lowest voicing is the first inversion, with the B on the 5th string at the 2nd fret, and the D and the G on the open 4th and 3rd strings, respectively. This voicing is identical in pitch and shape to the first inversion voicing we found on the lowest set of strings, here. In fact, because the intervals between strings 3, 4, and 5 are identical to those between 4, 5, and 6, the inversions will be shaped identically between the 2 string sets, but offset by 5 frets. The second inversion is here at frets 5, 5, and 4. Again, this shape is identical to the one on the previous string set at frets 9 and 10. The root position shape is here at frets 10, 9, and 7. On to the next string set, the lowest voicing is a second inversion, all on open strings, stacked 5th, root, 3rd, from low to high. Root position voicing is here on frets 5, 4, and 3. First position is here at frets 9, 7, and 8. On strings 1, 2, and 3, our final string set, the lowest possible voicing is like the top 3 notes of your G bar chord. It's a first inversion voicing at frets 4, 3, and 3. The next voicing is your second inversion voicing at frets 7, 8, and 7. I call this the D shape because it's the same shape as a D chord, but moved up the neck. The final shape is the root position voicing on frets 12, 12, and 10. I'll outline some exercises for memorizing these later in the video, but for now, let's talk about minor triads. Minor triads are distinguished from major triads by the quality of the third of the chord. Major chords are said to have a major third, meaning that the interval between the root and the third is a major third interval, or 4 half steps. Minor chords are distinguished by the minor third interval, or 3 half steps, between the root and the third of the chord. In both major chords and minor chords, you'll find a perfect fifth interval between the root and the fifth. Effectively, this means that the only difference between a major chord and a minor chord is the third of the chord. Let's find all of the close-voiced inversions of the A minor triad on the neck, using the G major chords that we just learned as a frame of reference. A is a whole step higher than G, so if we move the G major voicing up 2 frets, that would give us an A major voicing. Let's start with the first voicing we looked at, the root position G triad on strings 4, 5, and 6. Now move each of these notes up 2 frets, including the open note on the 4th string, which will fret at the 2nd fret. This is our root position A major. Recalling the fact that the only difference between a major triad and a minor triad is the third of the chord, we'll now identify which of these notes is the third and then lower it by a half step, resulting in the minor triad. Remember, because all of these chords are stacked in close position, the notes will always appear in the following order from low to high: root, third, fifth, root, third, fifth, etc. So to identify which voice is the third of the chord, we can simply look at the positions of any other voices we know in the chord. In this specific example, we have the root position A major chord on strings 4, 5, and 6 at frets 5, 4, and 2. We know that the root note of a root position chord is in the bass, so the voice on the next higher string would be the third, followed by the fifth on the top string. By lowering the third, in this case the middle voice of the chord, we're changing the triad from major to minor. And there's your root position A minor chord. The next chord's a little easier because it's in its first inversion, which by definition has a third of the chord in the bass. Let's move our first inversion G major chord up 2 frets and then lower the bass note to create an A minor in first inversion. Now, move up to the second inversion G major chord at the 10th and 9th frets, and let's move that up a whole step. The bass note is the fifth of the chord, which means that the next voice is the root, and the top note is the third. Flatting the top note gives us the second inversion A minor chord. Following this method, I recommend finding the other 9 close-voiced A minor chord shapes on your own. The ability to transpose these shapes to different keys and modulate them between major, minor, diminished, and augmented qualities is the skill that we're trying to practice. For now, I'll quickly go through the other 9 shapes, and they can also be found in the accompanying documents linked below in the video description. Strings 3, 4, and 5, the lowest voicing is in the first inversion, followed by the second inversion, then up to the root position voicing. Strings 2, 3, and 4, second inversion voicing, root position voicing, first inversion. On strings 1, 2, and 3, here's your root position, first inversion, like the top 3 notes of your A minor bar chord, and finally, second inversion. At this point, I recommend doing some drills to memorize these basic shapes. You can access the PDF titled Triad Inversions Exercise 1 in the video description below. This exercise simply moves from inversion to inversion, up each string set, then back down, then moving on to the next set. It's important to practice both ascending and descending when you do this type of work because you want to be prepared to access these chords in any situation. I recommend running this exercise with the metronome maybe once per day. Set the metronome as slow as you need to feel relaxed. Also, you'll note that the exercise is written in whole notes, but if you need to make each chord longer than 4 beats, please feel free. Remember that the correct way to do this is simply what works best for you. The key is to always play to a tempo and always remain relaxed as you practice. Pay attention to your body, and if you feel tension in your shoulders, back, jaw, or other parts of your body, that may be a good indication that you're trying to play too fast. Start as slow as you need, but a good target goal for this exercise would be to play each chord in half notes around 120 BPM. I'll demonstrate exercise 1 in its entirety. I have the metronome set to 100 beats per minute. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we're going to practice moving between G major and A minor using a technique called voice leading. Although there are many rules to voice leading, and the principles get more or less rigid depending on the musical styles you're adhering to, for now we're going to focus on the practice of moving each chord voice in the smallest interval possible while moving from chord to chord. This is a technique that most pianists learn early on when learning to move between chords, but it's a lesson that is often put off until later in guitar education. This is simply because of the nature of the two instruments, and it just happens to be easier to approach the guitar from the aforementioned pattern-based approach. For example, moving bar chords up and down the neck to transpose is much easier than revoicing each chord and changing the position of your fingers drastically with each chord change. We'll start with the lowest possible G major voicing on strings 4, 5, and 6, and move up that string set, alternating between G major and A minor. From this voicing, we'll move up to the next closest A minor voicing, which is here, the A minor chord in root position. Now, we'll move upward to the next closest G major voicing, which is in first inversion. Note how the chord tones on each string move very little. The A moves up to the B, the C moves up to the D, and the E moves up to a G, a minor third up. The largest interval in this transition is the minor third. The others are moving by a whole step. So from here, the next move is to A minor, which is also in first inversion. Simply move the shape up and flat the third, which is the bass note. Next is G major in second inversion. The C moves up to a D, the E moves up to a G, and the A moves up to a B. The final move is to A minor in second inversion. Again, move the shape up 2 frets and flat the third of the chord, which is found on the 4th string. From here, we're going to descend the same way we came up, just in reverse order. The second inversion A minor moves down to the second inversion G, then to the first inversion A minor, then to the first inversion G, then to the root position A minor, then back home to the root position G chord, where we started. Try repeating this process on your own through the remaining string sets. It's really important to engage with the concept in this way to really learn the material. If you get stumped, you can refer to the following exercise, which you can use to internalize the transitions between these chord shapes. Again, I have the metronome set to 100 BPM, but I recommend either starting without a metronome or by setting the metronome as slow as you need to in order to play the entire exercise correctly while relaxed. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Great, now we have the tools in place to practice our G major and A minor inversions and be able to move between them. I suggest practicing once or twice through each of these exercises daily with the metronome until you can do them in half notes around 120 BPM. Note that the exercises I gave you are in whole notes, so eventually you'll want to be able to do them at twice the speed with the metronome at 120. Take your time in learning these shapes because they're foundational to where we're headed. If this is your first time working with these shapes, I recommend giving yourself a week of practice time on them to really familiarize yourself. That way you'll avoid any breakdowns when it comes to incorporating them into the work we're about to do in the next lesson. In the next chapter, we'll talk about the diminished triad, and we'll practice all three of our triad types by exploring the chords that belong in the key of G major. This will create the possibility of using these shapes in the key of G major, setting us on the path to being fully self-expressed in any key you wish to play in. I hope that you found this lesson beneficial. Like I mentioned before, practicing this material really caused a breakthrough for me in my guitar playing, and I'm really excited to share with you the rest of the method. Did the material covered here answer some questions for you? Did it leave you with some questions? If you got something from this, please reach out to me or share with me in a comment. And of course, if you know anybody that might benefit from this series, please feel free to share this information with them. If you did find this video helpful, stay tuned to this series by subscribing to my channel or following me on social media. Thank you so much for watching. I'm really looking forward to sharing the next part of this lesson with you. Bye for now. See you next time.